information on the latest government grants and help during the COVID crisis. So none of this would be possible, of course, without our guest, Dan Crowther, CEO of Thorne Widgery. Welcome, Dan.
Mike.
Before we begin, just some quick ground rules. Everybody's going to be muted during the webinar, but you can unmute yourself during the Q&A session, just so we can see Dan's presentation. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Dan, and we'll do Q&As afterwards. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, hi everyone. So as Mike says, I'm the CEO of Thorne Widgery Accountants. Our job primarily through this a whole year, I suppose, is what we've seen as our role is to try and help local businesses through the pandemic, through lockdown, and out the other side as strongly as possible. And we want to make sure every business gets every support that they possibly can in terms of financial expertise and kind of advice. So the first thing we've done for this lockdown, which I just want to run through very, very briefly for lockdown 2, as I'm calling it, for this month, hopefully, that during lockdown, is put together a 6-point plan to cover what I think you should be doing in this period when actually times may be difficult. Maybe you're closed completely, maybe you are managing to operate, but trade is completely different to how it normally is. So we wanted to give businesses some focus to be able to come out of this as strong as possible on the other side. So very briefly, I'll cover those 6 steps and what I think they are. One of those is the government support packages, which I'm going to cover in more detail after that. So the first step, which I'm advising all of our clients and all local businesses to consider, is actually reviewing what your business can do during this period. There are lots of rules on what you can do in terms of whether you can actually open or not, but there are many things that you can actually review to see if you can pivot or adapt your business to be able to come out of this as successfully as possible the other side. So simple examples of that are things like the restaurants, which are now doing takeaways, the retail units, which are now doing click and collect. I've seen some great retail things going on, sort of personal shopping experiences, videoing, showing them what's around. So there's lots of things that can be done in terms of retail that even when you're not operating as you normally can do. So that's something I think is really interesting, and focusing on doing that enables you to survive this, I think. In terms of just why that's important, I think last time, or the first time around, the support packages were kind of better essentially than they are this time. So that might, whilst it might not have been viable to continue to try and trade the first time, actually this time it's more important. Secondly, there's the flexible furlough scheme now available, whereas the first time you had to kind of, you weren't allowed to work, the employee literally weren't allowed to work where you didn't get the furlough money. This time it's flexible, so you can have them working. So actually you can operate slightly differently, so you've got more flexibility to be able to do so. So I think that working out how your business can best adapt is really important. The second thing is cash flow. Cash flow, I always say this, is the lifeblood of the business. It's massively important, and measuring that and making sure that it works. I'm advising kind of to put together a 3-month cash flow to see how that all looks. It doesn't, cash flow always sounds like it's difficult and hard to do. It really isn't. It's literally as simple as take what money is in your bank right now, work out what you're going to have coming in each month, and take away what you're going to have going out. And it's as simple as that, and just see how that works and manage that for the next 3 months. Once you've got that together, you can then take some simple steps and actions to try and improve that if you need to. The third step I've recommended is the government support packages and reviewing those. I'm going to speak about those in a little bit more detail in a minute, but that's important to make sure you're on top of. Number 4, so as I said, one of the things we're trying to do is get all this information out there, because there's a lot of it and it changes all the time. The way that we're doing that is we're using our Facebook group and page primarily to get that information out. So if you're not sure about what to do, obviously Hereford will give them access to our things as well, so hopefully they can use it. But if you're not sure, then follow us on there, and we'll make sure you're up to date with everything that you need. The 5th one is what is something that a common theme. I speak to business owners all day, every day almost, and a common theme throughout is that they don't have time, or they have a lack of time to do all of the things they want to and need to do. So what my advice is over this period is perhaps when you've got a little bit more time than you normally have, because perhaps your business is not able to open or it's operating differently, is actually use that time effectively. I use this phrase of focus on what you can do rather than things that you can't. And that could be, there's a whole host of things you could use your time for. Improving systems and processes within your business, those jobs that perhaps, you're changing accounting system if it's something on your agenda to do, focusing on that new area of business that you haven't had chance to do, and there's potentially an area there to explore, but you've been focused on the day-to-day. So those type of things I think are really important to do. And the last one, which I've said to everybody, is if you need any help, we can help with all of those things about it. It's actually speak to us, because we can help you with it. We want to make sure that we're supporting our local businesses to get out of the side, because it's in all of our interest to do so. So that's our 6 steps and what we see as kind of focus for now. In terms of then, as I said, what I'm going to try and cover here is the government support packages in a little bit more detail. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the job support scheme. So the job support scheme was initially going to be ditched and replaced with something not quite as good. It's now been extended to the 31st of March. Okay, so we've got the job support scheme in place there. What it is, it's funding, it's the furloughing, the phrase that kind of we've all learned and to learn to love or hate during this period. But it's the furlough scheme where you get 80% of employees' wages funded for the hours that they don't work. It's better than the first time round, the first lockdown, because at that one we didn't have the ability to do it flexibly. So they either worked or they didn't. It was as a hard and fast rule. This time they can actually work part of the time and be furloughed for part of the time. So much more flexible, and allows much more flexible working for your business. So if you can operate limited hours, you can still operate rather than having to close the whole thing, which is a lot better. In terms of how this works, they must have been on the payroll by the end of October to qualify the employee. It is capped at £2,500, so that's the maximum that you can do on it for each employee. And just an important point to mention probably is it will still cost you as the employer, the employer's NIC and the pension contributions, so there still will be a cost associated with having employees on the payroll, so just to make sure you factor that in. So that's the job support scheme. The second one I'll mention is the self-employed income support scheme. Okay, the new guidance, they've announced another 2 grants on this. The first grant is for the months of November to January 21. It's for 80% of the average trading profits. You get it in 1 instalment, and it's capped at £7,500. Okay, so if you're self-employed, that's available to you. The second grant, which comes in, is for February to April. That one's a little bit unclear what that's going to be based on, how much it is at the moment. But we do know there is going to be one there. It applies to self-employed businesses adversely affected by COVID-19, with profits up to 50k and at least 50% of your income being from that source. Okay, so there is a bit of eligibility criteria, just to be aware. In terms of and you had to do 2019 tax return to be eligible. Okay, and continuing to trade through to next year, so 2021. Claims open at the end of November to be able to claim this, and they're expecting, and in Boris's words, that it will be paid in plenty of time for Christmas. So what that means, I don't know entirely yet, but that's what Boris has said. The next one to kind of cover off is the loan schemes. So the loan schemes, they were announced initially, they've extended those again. So there's 2 types. There's what they call a business bounce back loan and a coronavirus business interruption loan, which gets abbreviated to CBILS if you hear that terminology. So the bounce back loans, as I say, extended to 31st of January. They're for loans between £2,000 and £50,000, okay, but are limited to 25% of your turnover. So you can't borrow 50k if your turnover, 25% of your turnover is not as much as that. They're government backed. There's no fees or interest for 12 months on them, and then it's 2.5% interest thereafter. They've even extended the time period you can pay these back on now, so you can actually opt to pay them over 10 years. So amazing loans to be able to borrow interest free, a very good interest rate, and then a long payment period afterwards. So really important to consider whether that's it's a good consideration for you to take up. any business that's kind of negatively impacted can apply for them, and they're not allowed to be in financial difficulties. Okay, so i.e. can't be on the verge of kind of closing down and then get the loan in theory. Okay, so just be aware of that. If you needed more than the 50k that we were speaking about for this loan, then that's when you would usually go for the CBILS loan, because that's a higher value loan that you can apply for. They are more rigorous to apply for, and they may require some personal guarantees or funding, lending criteria to get them, and they are more difficult to get. So the bounce back loans, to be honest with you, if you're eligible, the application process takes about 15 minutes, and they usually get paid into your bank account the next day. So they're quite unbelievable source of finance. So I would always go for those before the CBILS. So the CBILS would just be considered if you want more than 50k. The next one I just want to cover off are the grants. So the grants are being administered by the local government. There's two sorts, which I'm just going to kick off, and we've got Roger here, who's going to, as an expert on these, I believe, so he's going to give us a bit of a rundown on them as well. But the first one is to do with the business properties. So if you've got a rateable property and it's been required to close, okay, so for instance, cafes and restaurants or non-essential retail, then you can apply for these grants. Okay, it's based on the rateable value of your property. If your rateable value is less than 15k, you will get £1,334 for the 4 weeks. If it's more than 15k but less than 51k, you will get £2,000 for the 4 weeks. And if it's over 51k, you will get £3,000 for the 4 weeks. Okay, so that's the what you will get for, if you meet the criteria. I believe that it's gonna be there to be able to apply for fairly soon. It's not at the moment. Those are all based on having business properties. There is an additional grant which is discretionary, okay, which is £1,500 at council discretion, I believe. At which point I'm going to bring Roger in, because he's our resident expert on this bit.
I think expert might be slightly oversold, but I know a little bit about it, so I could tell you what we know. So the packages, these packages have been announced by government over the course of the last week. So we're just kind of getting, and some of the more detailed guidance was published at the end of last week, and we're getting kind of confirmation through now of how we need to administer it, both of the schemes that Dan just kind of helpfully mentioned. So that they're not up and running as of yet, but obviously we're moving as quickly as we can now that we've got that information through from government and confirmation of budget allocations through from government as to how we might be able to deliver them. So my colleagues in the revenue and benefits team in the council that handle the kind of the business rate payments, and therefore are the kind of experts leading on the elements around payment around rateable value, are working through at the moment which businesses have been kind of ordered to close and are therefore eligible for that payment, and obviously we'll be in contact soon with those businesses that applies to. The second grant element is called the additional restrictions grant, or the can describe as additional restrictions grant in the government guidance, where there is some flexibility then for local authorities across the country, obviously including Herefordshire, to look at how we might initially plug some of the gaps around that. So there's obviously businesses that don't have a rateable value that will have been required to close, and there are businesses that, although not required to close, have had a very significant impact because of the second lockdown. And the government funds provide as a basis to be able to establish a grant scheme, an application grant scheme, as we did for the first round, that would help businesses that are affected in that way. So we're just finalising who might be eligible to apply for that grant. So a bit like last time, it'll be small, micro and small enterprises. those that have been ordered to close but don't pay a rateable value, obviously across the county, not just in Hereford, that will be able to seek some assistance, and then those that have substantially lost an income but are still open, are likely to be able to apply again for some assistance. And the levels of grant are likely to be consistent with the amounts that Dan just mentioned. So based on business size, to make sure there's a kind of consistent approach, the levels are likely to be around about 1,300 for very small businesses, 2,000-ish for slightly larger, and 3,000 and above for larger again. The government funding, I think, is kind of predicated on a per month payment based on, I guess, whether there's an extension to the national scheme now, or if at the end of the current national lockdown, we then move back into a tiered approach across the country that might also have trade restrictions. So Herefordshire was in tier 1 prior to the national lockdown, but obviously if at the end of December the national lockdown ends and we weren't in tier 1, then there might be a need to look for further grant support thereafter. The additional resources grant actually is an allocation of just over £3.8 million to Herefordshire for the next kind of 18 months. So it's an amount of money that government have allocated to us to kind of cover this lockdown and any future restrictions that there might be going forward. So as we've got some money to be able to quickly respond to help businesses if they're impacted by any future restrictions. We would hope that obviously these schemes it would obviously absolutely recognise it's a very hard time for businesses, and that you need the grant as soon as you can to cover the loss of trade that you've had. So we are working as quickly as we can to get both of those schemes up and running. Information obviously be on our website, or by all means drop me an email and we can make sure that you're on circulation lists if not already. And obviously we'll be sending information out to Mike to distribute out to all of the bid members as they become available.
Thanks, Roger. It's a great kind of insight into what's going on there. And the last, probably the last thing to mention, which was kind of new update in the last kind of set of things they've introduced, is the mortgage payment holiday. So if you are in financial difficulty, you were originally allowed to kind of go on a mortgage payment holiday for 6 months. That's still available. So if you haven't used that app, you can still take that up, and you are now also eligible to apply for a further 3 months on top of that. So that's also, it probably goes back to one of my first points of looking at cash flow, working out what your cash flow looks like, because as well as business, a lot of business owners need to take money out to survive as well, personally. So it will be built into the cash flow on things that you need. So that will come from that. The answers will come from the cash flow as to whether that's something that you would need to do. I think that's pretty much covered all of the latest government support packages that are available. So I'll hand back over to you, Mike, if that's okay.
That's great. Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you, Roger, for that. Just to remind our participants, if they have any questions, please do drop them in the chat box, and we'll ask Dan those as they come up. Some questions that have come in, Dan, to the bid. I think you kind of answered this anyway, but what is your opinion on the bounce-back loan, and who should make use of it?
And so the bounce-back loans, I've had a lot of discussions with people on the bounce back loans, and I'll give you the benefit of my opinion for what that's worth. So in terms of the bounce back loan, it really is an unbelievable opportunity to borrow and to finance. This sort of loan doesn't, I've never seen a loan like this before, and because of the circumstances, I probably never want to see them happen again. But in terms of a borrowing facility, it's unbelievable. So my recommendation to most businesses is actually seriously consider it, even if you don't need the funding now. And the reason I say that is because we've got a long time ahead of us in this, and when will business be back to normal? Will it be when the vaccine's in? And if it is when the vaccine's in, that's going to take some time. That's going to be released to different age groups. So we're probably in this for a little while yet. So even if you don't necessarily need the cash now, I don't think that's necessarily a right reason to turn down a loan of this nature. Because even if you needed it in 12 months' time, or even if you're not sure, my advice is if you're not sure at all, take the loan out, because it doesn't cost you anything for 12 months. It literally doesn't cost you a penny, and you've got 12 months then, and you can pay it back at the end of 12 months, and there's no penalties for doing so. It's almost a facility that my advice is to make use of it, on the basis that you never know if you're going to need it, and you may not have the option to. At the moment, it's been extended to 31st of January. But I would hate to think our businesses find themselves in a position where they need to borrow finance in 12, 18 months' time and are having to look at a different sort of facility, and could have made use of this one that's actually in place. So even if you don't need the money now, my advice is really do consider whether it's a good option for you to take it out.
Yeah, that's great. That just makes sense. Absolutely. Okay, another question. So if I wasn't able to claim anything the first time round, or even if I'm a new business now, what can I claim for? So that's quite a broad question.
Yeah, it is quite broad, so it does depend on circumstances on that, if I'm honest, and the different schemes are depend on which one you'd fall into. So on that one, so if you had with the job retention schemes, if I take that one first of all, so if you had a payroll scheme in place in October, so my understanding would be that you can claim. So if you didn't have one previously, you wouldn't have been able to, but now if you've incorporated or put a payroll scheme in place since, then I think you can. The self-employed income support scheme, if you weren't eligible for the original grants, you won't be eligible for this one. Okay, that's simple, but unfortunately you just aren't. Whether that's fair or not is a different matter, but the facts are you wouldn't be eligible. The loans, so the bounce back loans that I mentioned, you had to have been established before 1st of March 2020. So if you're established before then you are eligible to apply for those. The grants, I don't know, Roger the detail is not all there on the grants, but if you had a business rateable property, my thinking is you probably would be eligible. If you didn't have a business rateable property the first time, but now do, I would guess you probably are. I don't know if you had anything to say on that, Roger.
Yes, you should be. I think the national guidance is that you have to have a business that was operating at the end of October or start of November in order to be eligible for for either of the schemes. But obviously, if you were operating and operating at that time, there's a couple of dates. I think the guidance is slightly confusing. One mentions the 31st of October and the 4th of November. So we're just clarifying which is the key one. But if you're operational on that day and you are paying rateable value, you'll be eligible for that grant. If you're operating on that day and you weren't paying rates at that point, you should be eligible for the other discretionary scheme.
Thanks, Roger. Just had another question come in on kind of trading profits for the self-employed over 50k. So my understanding of that is if your profits are over 50k, then you aren't eligible for the self-employed income support grant. It is average though, so it's worth having a look at. You can actually log in to or go on the HMRC online and put your details in, and it will tell you if you're eligible or not. It should have the right criteria in there because it goes from everything that's kind of on your record. So I would, if you're not sure, I would really recommend that you do that and kind of go through the eligibility tool to see what it says. You can challenge it if you think it's wrong. I've had a few of my clients that want me to have a look at it and challenge it on their behalf because of certain circumstances. So it's certainly worth looking at.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. That's great. There doesn't seem to be any more questions at the moment. So unless there are any more, I will wrap this session up. So I'd just like to thank Dan again very much from Widgery, and also Roger for joining in as well. That's much appreciated. If anybody has any questions after the session, please contact the Hereford bid. We can pass them on to Widgery and make sure your query's dealt with. So thank you very much, and stay safe, and we'll get in touch if you need any help. Thank you very much. All right.
Thanks.
Bye.